Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our sixth session of ELWS. Today, before we start, a few Zoom keeping rules. Please mute yourself except when speaking. We request you to keep your video on. This is to encourage active listening and stimulate a classroom feeling. Please use the virtual Zoom chat option for your questions and concerns. This will be constantly monitored by one of our team members. You may use the hand raise option under participants to ask a question during the session. We will be using breakout rooms for today's session. If you mistakenly find yourself out of the breakout room, don't worry, you'll be able to join on your own without a problem. We also encourage you to utilize your thumbs up or clap reactions in response to the speaker so that they have good feedback during the session. With that, I'd like to start with where we are in this roadmap of the ELWS. We have finished 5 sessions up to now, and the last session was being assertive by Ms. Lalita Jagannathan. Today, we will have Mr. Arun Balaraman talk to us about giving and receiving feedback, an important aspect in everyday life for everybody in communication, especially in the corporate world. Mr. Arun has completed his undergraduate degree in India and has obtained a master's in computer science from the University of Florida and an MBA from Stanford University. He works in the software industry and currently manages products at Google. As an engineer and product manager, Arun has worked in the development of new products and the scaling of products alike. During his career, he has worked in different capacities as an individual contributor, a manager, and a leader of cross-functional teams, enabling him to experience giving and receiving feedback in a multitude of roles and scenarios. Arun and his family have been in Swami's fold since the early 80s. Arun has been a member of Psi Centers in Florida, Massachusetts, and Northern California. He is currently serving in the role of the president of the Sathya Sai Baba Center of Central San Jose. He has previously held the roles of Young Adult Advisor for Region 7 and Central San Jose Psi Center, and has also helped organize programs at the center and regional levels. With that, I would like you all to join me in welcoming Mr. Arun, and over to you, Mr. Arun. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritesh. Let me try to share my screen. Just 1 second. Are we able to see the screen that I'm presenting? Great. Thank you so much. And my humble pranams to Swami and for this opportunity to present this to you today. I think it's a wonderful leadership series that you're all part of. I wish I had something like this when I was growing up, when I was a young adult. It's really nice, and thanks to the organizers, thanks to Jaggu for giving me this opportunity to share with you. And the way I think of it is actually more than you. I benefited from preparing for this because it allowed me a lot of time to also introspect and put it together. And as Swami usually does, he kind of puts you to test to see actually whether whatever I'm actually talking about, and he gives me a test at work. So, I had a couple of those things also happen to me in the last couple of weeks. So that's Swami's way of making sure that I understood what I'm talking about. It's been a while since I've been in the midst of young adult company. So it's almost a year and a half, and it's really great to see all of you. I'm not able to see all the faces, but I think I can recognize the names. So with that said, I think we have a packed agenda in some sense. We're a little ambitious with the content, but the whole idea to think about this is it's actually it's a topic that has probably got no bounds to it, and is also very difficult to think about every scenario in which it applies. So it's more of a session to raise awareness of the topic of giving and receiving feedback, and giving the larger context in which it operates, and also giving time for you to actually introspect about your own journey and what you're dealing with, and see how some of these principles can be applied. It's more kind of raising the awareness of that. And if there's one thing I would like you to take away from this, is to raise the awareness and consciousness about the feedback aspect of it, how to receive and give feedback, and also to keep the large perspective in mind. So that's a few takeaways to take from this. So let me start off then. And again, since this is a topic on feedback, I really look forward to your feedback anytime. So that's my meta point. So this is first I wanted to talk, give about what Swami's advice is. And Swami, as you know, has been a personification of how he's mentored, how he's coached, how he teaches, and is constantly used feedback as a tool in which he's actually helped everyone around us and us ourselves. So here is a quote I'll just read out. Whatever people may say about the faults that you know are not in you, don't feel for it. As for the faults that are in you, try to correct them yourself, even before others point them out to you. Don't harbor anger or bitterness against people who point out your faults. Don't retort, pointing out their faults, but show your gratitude to them. Trying to discover their faults is a greater mistake on your part. It is good for you to know your faults. It is no good for you to know others' faults. The main thing that Swami is really focusing on here is for us to actually have that self-confidence in us, have the ability to look for how we can learn and improve ourselves, and be open and ask for that, and don't actually worry about who's giving the feedback and try to find other reasons why they're giving the feedback. So Swami kind of gives this as one of the quotes. There's many other quotes of Swami. I thought this would be a good one to start with. And Swami has also shown how to give feedback. You know, you've seen how he coaches people in the present moment, how to deal with the situation. Or he also has an act in which he praises people and he praises them in the public. But when he's trying to correct them, he will correct them in private. So he builds a trust with the person with whom he's actually coaching. He listens to people, right? And it's a very important aspect of actually being a person when you're giving a feedback, the whole notion of listening, and also when you're receiving feedback, to really listen and not actually have our fences drawn around us and trying to filter what we take from it. And feedback is actually an integral part of our lives, right? We all do different roles. As a son or a daughter, with your parents, or actually as peers working together in your company, there's constant feedback going back between two of us. Also between a manager and an employee, or if you're playing sports, between a coach and a player. And of course, you can imagine different roles in which such feedback happens. As I mentioned to you, the goal of this session is to raise the awareness about ourselves, the roles that we perform, get the larger context, and focus on our purpose and the core fundamentals before we get into the aspects of what feedback does. Understand then the role and the purpose of the feedback, and then introspect our current struggles, if you have any, with feedback, and then learn some techniques to take control of feedback and really make it a strength, because it's almost like instead of being reactive to it, how can we make feedback our core strength and skill, and use that as a way to improve ourselves as well as to achieve the goals of whatever you're working on. So going back to setting the context actually, and this is something I've used a long time back, and I think I thought I'll use this as a basis. I know if Lakshman is there on this, he would probably remember this one that we had put together a long time back. So as all of us actually perform different roles in our lives. And if I have to broadly categorize, this is for myself, I have to categorize, is I have a role as a member of a family. I have a role at work. I have a role in a SI organization. I have a role as a citizen in the community that I am part of. And all of them have specific role definitions, if you will, within it. As a family, as a part of the family, I'm a parent, I'm a son to my mother, I'm a husband to my wife. Same thing at work. I've got similar roles I'm doing at the SI organization. I'm a center officer. I'm also a volunteer. So all of these are different roles, and all of these roles actually have specific responsibilities that go with it. So the alignment, so we are as individuals, and we have goals, we have values, we have needs, we also have skills that we bring to the table, and also our needs also to improve them. An organization that I'm using loosely the word organization. You can think of family as one such thing. The being part of a country is one such thing. So I'm kind of loosely using the word organization. So don't think of it as actually belongs to a company or a SI organization. It's broad. I'm kind of using this as just as a name placeholder. They also have goals. They also have values. They have culture associated with it. They have some needs in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And also they have resources. And when we actually, we are either voluntarily taking on roles, in some cases we are involuntarily are taking a role. So in all of these roles, we need to clearly understand what the role is and what the expectations are. And that is very critical because that kind of provides the baseline, if you will, with respect to everything else you do later. If that is not clear, then all this feedback and everything else and issues that happen are really sort of like further down the chain. Actually, then it becomes like a whack-a-mole game because almost like many a time we see problems before we fully understood and what we can do to prevent it, how do we handle with it. So it's very important to get this perspective. And to accomplish all of this, we are part of a human ecosystem, right? Because if we are just alone by ourselves, that's one thing, but all our roles actually involve interacting with people. So we have a manager sometimes whom we work with, or someone with such a role who is responsible for something larger that we are part of. We sometimes are managers or coordinators who have other members that we actually are working with. We also have peers that we work with. This is sort of like, and especially more and more in the world that we work in, everyone is almost like a peer. It's because it's sort of, everything is about less about hierarchy, but more about how do you exchange information, how do you work together, how do you collaborate together. So in all of this, the interaction and collaboration with people are very critical in doing our roles. And the communication and the feedback to each other is very critical. And one thing nice about the leadership program, if you see, you've got different programs. Some of them are talking about how to be assertive. Another one is about how to actually resolve conflicts. All of these are very, very important. All of these are important pieces of the puzzle in order to get them right, in order for you to be a strong leader. We're having a set of breakouts as part of this. And the idea here is to make it more of an introspective journey for you as much as you see some of the theory that goes with it. And as part of it, I think we will first have breakout to understand what your roles are. And you probably have done some homework on that. And you'll probably be paired up with someone and you'll be paired up with that person for the entire session. And then after we go through some concepts about feedback, then we'll have another session to go back and see how you apply some of these receiving feedback concepts to what you've been dealing with, and also same thing for giving feedback. So you'll see a continuity in this thread of these breakouts going from one to the other, that you'll be paired up with one person as you go along. This is the homework that was given. I'm not going to ask you here who all have done the homework, but that'll become quite evident when you go into your breakout session. In case you've not done this homework, you may want to contemplate on it. And then actually, in a breakout session, if you're paired up with someone, where if the other person has done the homework, they will start sharing, and that gives you time to think about what you want to share. The idea here is it gives the canvas in terms of actually what are the roles you do and which particular role you want to focus on today, where you want to use that as the canvas in which you're dealing with people and feedback and those issues. So, so I think we are going to go now, Ritesh, into a breakout room, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Arun, I think you're right. And for those who have not done the pre-session work, I've just pasted the link to the sheet with the questions in the chat window. So please do open that and just contemplate on that. I'm in the breakout rooms now for 8 minutes, and then when we come back, we'll debrief again. So see you all soon.
Thanks everyone to join back. If you could actually take a minute to type into the Zoom chat window the particular role that you are going to focus on as the role in which you're going to improve, introspect about feedback and improve on it. So if you can all just type it in the chat window. And also, if you don't mind, if you are talking employee, maybe the context, maybe a school teacher, it may be actually that will also give a little bit more context. I really like Sandeep's as a father. And Ganapati as a spouse. We got tech employee, project lead, Um, Sundar's got responsibility to self-improvement, so is his own boss. Hardware reliability testing, data scientist, employee/spouse. Has chosen 2 roles. Great. Side devotee, awesome. Manisha. Thanks everyone for sharing. So keep this in your mind, and as you will work through this session, as we kind of get to the introspection as you go along, you can focus on this as the role in which you are further contemplating on. So with that in mind, let me move on with the slides. So as I was mentioning before, we kind of get more into feedback, we talked about roles, but let's focus on what we should get about getting our fundamentals right, actually, because it's very easy to go talk about feedback and this is happening and all that is happening. But as you know, there's no end to it, right? Because you're going to be in constantly in different roles, you're going to be interacting with people, and there are so many variables that go into the picture, right? Because there's so many things you control, so many things you don't control, all of those. So it's very important to get our fundamentals right so that we can approach this in the right way. And what I wanted to capture here is, before we talk about the roles itself, unfortunately, I couldn't do this as a build slide, but I wanted to just walk through one at a time. And most important thing that which sort of I've realized, and also from really seeing Swami's teachings, and is that you have self-confidence and that connection to Swami and the belief in Swami and following those values is extremely important, because that is actually what gives you the inspiration, that gives you the feeling of the right set of values, right way of approaching it. And if anything happens outside, you don't get caught up in it, but you always have that inner confidence in you in how to handle situations. So the self-confidence is extremely important, and this is not just about a one-time thing, it's also the constant awareness. And if you don't have the constant awareness, if things are in your work going south, always keep remembering this and keep bringing it back to that. That actually results in the love all, serve all, which is the attitude in which we look at the world, and not actually from the perspective of what happens to me, am I successful, all of that kind of are more of a things that follow from there. But what is more important is following those values and having the notion of loving and serving all is very, very important, actually, because very easy emotionally when you're dealing with people and situations and deadlines and timelines to really get caught up in it. But this perspective always brings you back up. The other one is actually as you're doing our roles, how does that kind of meet traction with those roles, right? That's where understanding the role and the responsibility, the duty, understanding the duty, working with discipline, working with devotion, all of those are very important. This because all of these are not about the small wins that you see in each of these roles, is actually about the longer term thing of actually how it's all about our own growth, and learning is an extremely important aspect of it. I think if you look at all of our roles in life, is all in the context of actually that we're spiritually improving ourselves. We're actually doing Swami's work. We are constantly learning. It actually makes everything a lot more pleasurable. And rather than the other way around of thinking about how it's because otherwise you look at everything as evaluative, everything as friction, all that will go away because you look at it with the right perspective. It's very important to have this perspective, because in a larger equation, this is probably the most biggest value part of the equation, because everything else is just smaller variables which actually don't add much value in the larger scheme. So that actually, with that in context, doing these roles makes a big difference. I just want to set the context because at the end of the day, this is what matters. One of the things I think I was in one of the breakout rooms, actually there was, I think a school teacher was saying this growth mindset is a very concept that actually is used in schools. And I just wanted to bring it here. This concept actually was brought out by Carol Dweck, who's actually a professor at Stanford. And I think it's widely adopted now for children, for athletes, all of them. The thought process here is that actually there's a typical notion of fixed mindset where you feel that skills are born, I can't really improve it. I just cannot learn new things. I am what I am, kind of a thing. And there's a growth mindset which says that anything I can actually learn, talent can be learned, skills can be learned. I'm constantly improving and I'm constantly growing. That I think is a mindset that is extremely important. And all of us are this concept actually, all of us will feel it resonates with us. We feel that we're doing it all the time, but really actually to remind ourselves, because sometimes we are in this mindset, sometimes we are not. And it all depends on the situation where we are in. So it's very much kind of being aware of this one. So one of the key things to think about actually the difference between a growth mindset person and a fixed mindset person. A growth mindset person is constantly looking at skills, building skills and everything as something that leads to growth. Whereas a fixed mindset person may think it's not that important. I know what I know and I'll just keep doing what I do. Difficulties actually, growth mindset person embraces it and perseveres, right? I think even if it happens in the context of interaction with people in terms of the work you're doing. Whereas I think a fixed mindset person tends to sort of back down from this, and they avoid it actually. They avoid difficulties. Same thing actually when something goes wrong, they avoid doing work where you could make a mistake. A fixed mindset person, growth mindset person takes challenges. They kind of use it as a way to learn, because that's the only way you can actually improve. And also same thing, feedback, a growth mindset person goes proactively and gets feedback because they're not bothered about they've only bothered about improving themselves. So this is just, I just wanted to say, let's set this context of how to be in the growth mindset. I wanted to show this just to kind of make it a little bit more fun. I wanted to play this video of Michael Jordan. For youngsters who may not know him, he was the basketball icon whom everyone sort of looked up to. And I'm going to play his video. Oh, sorry.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Good! The game's over, and the Bulls have won. Jordan beat him at the buzzer with a jump shot in the circle.
Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I led you to believe it was easy when it wasn't. Maybe I made you think my highlights started at the free throw line and not in the gym. Maybe I made you think that every shot I took was a game winner. That my game was built on flash and not fire. Maybe it's my fault that you didn't see that failure gave me strength, that my pain was my motivation. Maybe I led you to believe that basketball was a God-given gift and not something I worked for every single day of my life. Maybe I destroyed the game. Or maybe you're just making excuses.
I thought I'll play this video. I think, Michael Jordan actually is, these are athletes who were not actually, sometimes they were not thought to be top players, but they worked their way up there. And even when they won championships, they just kept, trying and becoming better day by day, because as more and more younger players came in, they still were on top of the game. And so the point here is actually be very, very positive that you can actually do whatever you want to do. And so that's an extremely important thing to keep in mind. So a growth mindset, just to summarize, abilities can be developed, talents can be learned, strengths can be enhanced, potential is unlimited. I can be better tomorrow compared to today. And I look forward to new situations and challenges. And really what it translates to, in many cases at work and other places, you really achieve more in your role and career, because you're not afraid to actually to get feedback and improve. You grow more in your capabilities, and others also want to work with you, right? Because they know that you're a person who's not defensive, you're a person who's actually trying to embrace and move forward. It also leads to high levels of happiness and satisfaction. So just to keep in mind saying that, I think to embrace this. For an organization, it's very important because to make sure that if you're part of an organization and you have the ability to influence the organization, reward learning, emphasize collaboration to learn from others, capitalize on setbacks. Setbacks is good, you can learn from setbacks. Mistakes are part of the learning, and ideas can come from anywhere. There's no communication boundary. These are all good learning organizations have. that leads to higher job satisfaction. There's more trust among employees, and also career growth and more innovation of these companies. So just wanted to set this thing that it applies to both individuals as well as employees. So let's talk about role and importance of feedback. An employee actually, and I'm using the word employee here, this you could substitute it for anything else. It's kind of tough to come up with a common word. Any person actually has got goals, right? And those goals actually something that they want to achieve, right? With respect to their, whatever role they're taken on. They also have learning goals, they want to improve. They also want to be successful in accomplishing what that is. An organization similarly has similar goals. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in place. They also have immediate deliverables, projects, and tasks, and those things. And also, they measure themselves by business success. And an employee and an organization, when they come together, that's where I think the magic happens, because that's where things get done, and that's where also troubles also happen, right? So projects actually, where feedback sort of comes in is, in order to do a project, right? In order for the project itself to do well, there is feedback that happens in how to improve, how do we achieve the goal that we want to. So there's feedback that happens at a project level or whatever is the thing that you're working on. The employees that are working on it have to come together to make it happen. So in that process, there's feedback needs to happen on how they can better work together, how they can actually, respond to my email, that kind of stuff, like, so that, you have to write it in this particular way, or you do this, so much of feedback happens in order to achieve that goal. An employee also is trying to improve on their performance, right? You need to present it like this. You need to write an email a little bit more succinctly, or you need to get your design correctly, all this, so that they can improve on their own performance and skill. Also, employees also are trying to grow in their career. They want to become a senior engineer, manager, whatever that be. So all of these require feedback in order for the project to advance, for people to work together, and that to accomplish, as well as for the person to also grow. So, but giving and receiving feedback are really two sides of the same coin, right? It really requires, in some sense, two to tango. So that means as a giver, as a receiver, and it's always a continuous process. It should be a continuous process. It can't be like this one time and problems happen, we talk, or there's an evaluation that happens and we talk. It's got to be a continuous process. It'll be a combination of formal and informal, right? A lot of amazing things happen when it's informally happening, in situation, and all of those. It could be planned, you have planned one-on-ones or planned reviews, all of that stuff. Or it could happen in situations as things are happening. It could be verbal and non-verbal. It's very important to kind of understand. Sometimes people's behavior tells you feedback. Sometimes they're very verbal in terms of giving the feedback. So you have to very important to keep it in mind. So there are many types of feedback. Here are some ways to look at it. Is appreciation feedback, where a person did a particular thing very well, and as part of their progression, they're very aware of it, but not just to say you did a great job, but to be very clear about what exactly they would have done, and why emphasizing that will enable them to know they did a specific thing where they need to keep working on it. So appreciation feedback, all of these can happen impromptu, it can happen in a structured way. Same thing, coaching feedback, where someone is trying to improve, and as part of improving, how do you say you could have done something like this because this is what you're trying to achieve? So it's a coaching feedback on how to improve. And evaluation feedback is something that happens because a particular role requires certain things to get done, certain things to be hit. So as part of it, is this person actually doing it. And so the appreciation, coaching, and all of them are important pieces that go into evaluation feedback. So these, so you have to be cognizant of these different types of feedback and not mix up these together. And what makes feedback very complex? I'm just quickly going to play through this. It sounds all nice and dandy, right? I think the question is, when two people work together, it's context, right? Because a person giving a feedback may be in a context, a person receiving feedback may be in a different context. They may not know what exactly you're trying to say. The language being used could be unclear. Someone may use a word, the other person may interpret it very differently. They may use labels, but they may not know exactly what you're talking to, what instance are you talking to. Attitude of the person, right? The person may not be in a great mood when they're giving. The receiving person may not be in a great mood. The motivations may be unclear. Where is it coming from? The culture may be very different. Some people are very top-down cultures. Some people come in a very peer culture. The communication style may be very different. Some are very direct. Some of them don't like to be direct. They want to receive stuff in a much more soft way. Our ego comes in a big way because we care about who we are. And once this gets threatened, actually that results in how we take feedback. So this makes feedback very, very complex. But one thing is very clear, we have to make receiving and giving feedback really a skill and the strength in order to be successful, because this is a must in order for us to do the role, whatever role that you do, even with your child, as a parent, all of those. Which means being aware of the giver, of us as the receiver, the other way around, the context, all is so important. So at this point, we're not going to break out, but I would like you all to, if you've done the homework, great, but I would like you to sort of at least introspect about it as you go along the next of the slides, so that when we, at the end of this session, you will go into your breakout and talk through how you would have improved a situation that you're dealt with. So the point here is, do you find feedback to be valuable? Do you feel comfortable receiving feedback? And are there situations where you found it very difficult receiving feedback? And if so, why? Be very honest about that and write it, and keep that in mind, write it for yourself so you can discuss it in the breakout room. Or given also, if you found it to be very valuable, also what is the situation and why was it actually valuable? It's very important to note down. We're going to talk about receiving first before we go to giving. So we focus on self part first before we go into the other part of giving to others. Feedback actually, the reason why feedback fundamentally is very difficult for people, it's kind of sits at the crux of two conflicting needs in all of us. There's one end, all of us want to learn and grow. We want to do awesome things. There's another part actually is we want to be accepted. We want to be respected. We want to be loved just the way we are. So this kind of sometimes conflicts with each other when we receive feedback. And again, given all the context of, am I being performance evaluated? Who's this person telling me? It makes it really complicated. But if you just boil it down, I think these two things constantly come in our way. But we have to really keep in mind, am I trying to learn and grow so that the other thing doesn't come in our way? But we have to accept the fact that everyone is going through this. And our ego protects us, and it tries to, this is sort of as human beings, we have a defensive survival thing that kicks in, which actually looks at feedback, which looks like a criticism to us as something that's attacking us, and we immediately put up defenses around us to protect ourselves. So this kind of is something that we are programmed naturally to do this. So be very cognizant of this. And some negative feedback takes 2/3 of energy compared to positive feedback, which just takes 1/3. So even when one is giving feedback, you have to be very cognizant of it, and receiving is the same thing. So being cognizant of this allows you to separate out these emotions. That's what I think these slides are trying to do. And each of us are very different in how we handle our feedbacks. All of us have some baseline, normal state. And this is actually where some of them by nature are like super positive, right? They're like, anything happens, doesn't matter. They quickly sort of get to this. They're very cheerful, happy all the time. And some of us may actually have a little bit more low in our energy level, if you will, right? So happy to grumpy sort of a thing, many of us have different base levels in which we operate. When someone actually gives us a positive feedback, for some people, that takes us away from the baseline at different levels. So for some people, the positive feedback just kind of like gives a quick high or immediate high, and some of them, it doesn't bother them that much. Negative feedback also can has a similar sort of impact to it. But there's nothing about right or wrong about it. It's just being aware of this thing, so that actually we understand who we are and where we are when the feedback sort of comes in. Because someone actually who's really not bothered much about positive or negative may not actually be learning also. So it's not like actually these feedbacks, processing them is quite important. The sustained part is actually where someone gave us a feedback, whether it's positive or negative, how long does it actually keep us in this sort of like a bad state if it's negative, or if it's a positive state, which is super positive. That's called the sustained part. And different people actually have different sustains, if you will, carry forward with it for a long period of time, right? Just be aware of all of these things. I wanted to now, this is actually work that was done by a couple of people called Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. And they did a study called Thanks for the Feedback. And I was part of some of your reading material that was given. So the way they kind of broke it down is, there are 3 feedback triggers that kind of come in our way: truth triggers, relationship triggers, and identity triggers. Let's focus on truth triggers. The truth trigger says is someone gave you feedback by some statement which said that you were not assertive today, or whatever that be, right? You didn't present well today. So sometimes actually that feedback by itself, by that statement, by not understanding the details of it, one may feel the content of the feedback is wrong. This is not true actually. I was quite assertive, or whatever that is. Or I'm a great bhajan singer, that sort of thing. It's unfair. It's like, it's not very helpful what they said. That really did not happen, because you're looking, you didn't parse through, the person was not clear, and you didn't parse through what it was. The reason is actually because there was a mismatch in the labels that the person used. They said you should be a team player, be assertive, all of those things. Another thing is also, we also have a blind spot. We have a perspective of who we are, right? And only someone else can shine the light on us on what we are not good at. So blind spot is extremely important. That's what feedback is super helpful in our growth. The other one is the relationship trigger. This one is actually where you know a person from before and you have constant interaction. And in that process, you feel that the person is unfair, or they're always unfair. They're very questionable motives. Who's this person to tell me they're not good at what they do anyway? It's after all, what I've done for you, why are they telling me this? This sort of thing where the person comes in the way of understanding understanding what the intent and what they're really trying to give us. So this is to be aware of the relationship trigger. The other one is identity trigger. Actually, this is where we have a personality. We think something about who we are, but when someone says a feedback to us, immediately we swing and say, you know what, looks like this person says this favor. I just feel I can't do anything right. That one person's feedback is interpreted to be everyone saying that. Or for the rest of it, I feel discouraged. It's almost like immediately kind of changes your identity. The reason is actually because one is overwhelmed by the feedback, because it affects the identity of who they are. And it affects and also you take one instance and extrapolate it as if it's, that's who you are, and not able to discern the feedback part from the message. So this sort of comes in our way. One thing is very important to understand: receiver is in charge of the feedback. If there's one simple thing to know, because the receiver is the one who needs to figure out what they're going to accept and what they're going to allow themselves to improve on themselves. Because giver can give whatever they want. The receiver is in charge. So it's very, very important to remember this. As Lakshmi said, children hold the mirror and show our blind spots. Actually, children do point out to us when you tell them, hey, you be like this, they do tell back to us. That's a wonderful thing that Lakshmi, you mentioned. So as a receiver, be very proactive and seek feedback. I think it's better to be on the front foot, because you're a learner, be on the front foot. Ask for the feedback in a specific area. Be very specific what you want. Get a very well-rounded, ask multiple people so that you get different perspectives and see if many of them are pointing the same thing. Look out for both indirect and direct feedback. Sometimes, you realize that you send some message, people didn't reply back to you. There's some reason behind it. Or you look at the body language, you'll figure out, right? Understand all of those. Take a step back and process information. You don't need to immediately react to it. Process it in a calm mind. Separate your opinion from the fact. And take a very balanced view. You'll get positive feedback, negative feedback, separate them out. This is very, very important actually as a receiver. And when you get this feedback, don't look at, oh, what did I do? How could I have done? Look at it from the perspective of how can I take this input and how I can improve myself going forward. How can I translate into specific actions that I can do so that I can keep moving forward? This is super important, and be very gracious and grateful about the feedback to the person giving. Whether you fully accept everything that they give is very important, because a feedback giver is also doing a favor in order to help us learn and improve. So take feedback as something, be proactive and put it into and make it your strength and skill. And if you do this, I think it makes you in charge of lifelong learning. It definitely improves the relationships, because the other person actually realizes that you're a learner, you're seeking inputs, and you are also able to talk through, and you're also improving. So that improves the relationship. And they also trust you when you give feedback to them, because they know you're a person who's a good receiver, also could be a good giver too. It also reduces a lot of stress and anxiety, and really it can help to your personal career growth. Frankly, it doesn't matter who the other person, what they said. It's all about ourselves and how we're improving ourselves. So think of it from that perspective. So overcoming these roadblocks, the truth trigger, just kind of summarizing here, discern the type of feedback. We talked about, they said something, I don't believe it. Figure out what is it that they are saying. Figure out, are they appreciating? Are they coaching? Are they evaluating? Make sure that actually you try to understand, the aspect of what they are saying. Ask for more details so that you know exactly what the feedback is. Shift from what that's wrong to tell me more. This is exactly what I was saying. Get clarity behind what they are saying. Make sure that you come out of that discussion knowing very clearly the specific thing that you understand from it, rather than actually getting caught up in the emotion. And see actually blind spots. Figure out actually, ask for a second opinion. How did I ask? How did I come? What did I do to come in my own way? This kind of asking for blind spots. Sometimes you need to ask for them to tell you, because they may be shy to tell you. They may not want to hurt you. Even feedback givers are also not great, right? They're also sometimes being very nice. On the relationship part, separate what from the who. Separate out, who the person is, all that emotion from what they're giving us. Very, very important to separate it out so that actually you can glean, because the two, when you mix it together, there are signals which are just kind of coming in the way of each other and you can't distill. And also when you do that, identify the relationship system, who is giving it to it, and how is their feedback giving in the context my working with them. So all of those are very important to understand so that you can discern the feedback very clearly. The identity part is, as I had mentioned before, our wiring sort of affects when we hear feedback, right? I talked about this baseline, swing and sustain. They really distort the feedback, but being aware of it really helps us to really discern the feedback. And make sure that your emotions are not coming. For example, right, let's say you are going to your office, suddenly you are in a bad state of mind and a car just came in front of you, right? Immediately you honk or whatever it is because your state of mind affected that behavior. Let's say you had got promoted and you're super happy and you're driving, right? When the person came in front of you, you probably, oh, that guy had a bad day or something like that, right? But it all comes down to how you are feeling inside that comes in the way. It's not about the other person. So emotions play a big role. And then actually the other thing is also try to dismantle distortions, see feedback at the actual size, be prepared, be mindful, don't take it as it is, figure out actually where is it in the larger perspective of things, separate the feeling, separate the story, separate the feedback. Is this coming from us? So just be very, very methodical and analytical about it and have a growth identity. The other thing I wanted to also call it, feedback receiving doesn't mean that you have to basically accept all feedbacks, right? It's not, because not all feedback may be necessarily very useful and helpful, right? So it's totally fine to say no to feedback too. But when I say no to feedback is not accepting the feedback or hearing it, but figuring out if it makes sense or not. If someone is giving a feedback about your character, they say that you are, instead of giving the actual specific sort of instance of something, if they're just telling you that you're not reliable or you are actually not an ethical person, all of these are very character stuff, and those are not helpful at all, right? Because they actually they're not really helping you. So it's actually more about the behavior that's more interesting to know. Is the feedback unrelenting? They're just like totally giving you, constantly pounding with you. They're not giving you time to process it, for you to learn, to adapt it. That's also not great, because that thing is not very useful in receiving feedback. When you change based on the feedback, are they just pounding with more and more demand? That means there's no end to it, right? That's also another aspect. And also sometimes feedback may be given as a threat, right? You're going to be fired if you don't do this, right? I'm going to walk out. All of these are threats, right? And so that actually is also not very helpful, because they're just giving the threat as a reason for you to change. When you explain the feedback isn't helpful, is the other person dismissive, or they really are working with you to really make you understand and for you to grow? So all of these are very, very important things to factor in. So as much as it will be proactive about it, also be very mindful of actually what type of feedback is coming in and how to process it. So what I've captured here is a little bit of the framework of how to think about feedback. What are the factors that first to analyze ourselves on how our state of mind, how we react to feedback, how do we actually, when people give us feedback, how do we not get caught up in the emotion of it? How do we calm down I try to separate truth and facts from actually the other information that comes in the way. How do we actually not get bothered about who's saying, but looking at the content of it? How do we look at it from a growth perspective? How do we make sure that they are shining light in the blind spot? How do you look for more people to give you information so that you're not reacting to just one feedback and immediately run after it? Look for other people to confirm the same so that it's really a problem that you need to work on. And also understand that actually how to also process out feedback, which is not useful. So I just want to make sure that you have some of these things in mind. Obviously, your specifics may just vary, but these are just some factors to keep in mind. And Ritesh, should we go into the breakout room at this point?
Yes, I think that's doable. And I just wanted to tell everybody that this will be for 10 minutes, 9 minutes actual, and with 60 seconds of grace period. And you will be with the same pair that you were with before. So you can continue your conversation. And as Uncle,
yeah, I can add
go
to
ahead.
it. So basically, when you go into your breakout rooms, you already talked about your roles before. And I asked you to introspect about situations, about feedback and how valuable it is. How do you feel comfortable? Situations you felt comfortable, situations you did not receiving feedback. Now, going back into your room, actually, if you can share with the other person about the situation that you're dealing with, and how would you now, with the few minutes that you probably had to process what we talked about, what is that? How will you apply these learnings to that? It will not be very, you not have the chance to completely process it, but whatever comes to the top of your mind, please do that. And then with that in mind, how would you now approach receiving feedback? One is a situation how you handle. Another one is actually how will you approach going forward the way you will receive feedback. So this is the introspection that you'd like you to do, and then share it with your partner. And then after you do that, you can come back. Right, I hope you had a good breakout session, and feel free to also type in your feedback if anything we need to modify as you go along, since it's a session about feedback. What I would like you to do is in the chat window, if you can all sort of type in what triggers did you identify in your own receiving experience, like what kind of came in your way of receiving feedback. We talked about the different triggers, right? I think it's either about the identity, it's about the relationship, maybe the truth of it, or anything else. You don't have to use the same word, but any things that kind of came in the way of you getting your feedback. Vishwanath says truth triggers. Sanjana says being defensive. Lakshmi says timing, sometimes it's too quick. Kshitij is about the who part of it, the relationship trigger. Truth and timing, relationship, identity. It's a good mix actually of the different triggers actually that everyone has called out. Identity, relationship, truth. Cool. So we will, thanks for sharing that. Let's go to the second question. Would like if some of you can share, what amount, with your discussions that you had, how do you plan to overcome them? Whomever feels comfortable to share, if you just raise your hand to share, then I'd like to call on you. Was it Namita who raised a hand?
So yeah, I can go first. I did not, but I can. Yeah. So having seeing that feedback like as a very balanced approach, not getting too emotional to it, and trying to identify the intent of the feedback. So if it is like related to some of my things where I should improve, I'll work on that. And if it is not, then I will try to get multiple feedbacks and try to find the truth. Yeah.
That's great. Actually, if you sort of if you separate ourselves emotionally from the situation, what you would normally do to solving any other problem, I think if you apply the same thing, it works beautifully. Thanks, Namita, for sharing.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to share? Fearless young adults, please. Roar like a lion.
Sundar, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, being a coach, we're always thinking, we should always apply the highest model, to everyone when we're coaching, and everyone should try to emulate the highest model. And so, based on my talk with, Xintej, realizing that maybe sometimes maybe that model is not quite for them, even though that's considered the prime model. And, maybe you have to go to the next best option for the person, right? Because maybe that technique is too difficult for them, or maybe that technique is, physically it hurts them because everyone's body's built a little differently. So trying to not get so caught up in the prime model and try to make it a little more personal to each person.
That's a good one, Raj. Basically, the challenge in the situation is like, how much do you, as a coach, understand the the potential of the person and push, versus actually how do you actually tailor it to the person so that person doesn't give up. So in some sense, you're now a giver of feedback rather than a receiver, but you have to keep the receiver in mind. Thanks for sharing, Sundar. Vishwanath, I think, wanted to share.
So, Sairam, Arunji, thanks for asking that question. So, for me, I think true triggers is something that I've definitely wanted to look into. So, if the feedback is genuine and if that's something very true about myself, I would like to do that introspection and try to actually fix myself in certain areas. But when feedback actually just keeps insisting of something of you which is actually not true, so I have a tendency to actually resist and say that, no, this is not true right away. I'm not too sure if that's the right way to immediately react, or I should have probably just accepted it and then decided to just ignore that feedback. So that's how I would actually react to true triggers. So this is either at office or also be it in any other relationship issues also.
Well, thanks for sharing, Vishwanath. I think it's it looks like Sandeep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, Sairam. So one of the tough part which I felt was, if the person is not trying to follow and he's giving the feedback, that's when I find it kind of really tough to take the feedback. So then, like, after seeing your slides and after listening to your talk, I really liked your phrase of discerning what and who. So just try to find out who is giving feedback and what is the feedback. So in this case, I would try to focus on what rather than who, because if he's not following and if he's giving the feedback, so I would try to ignore the who part and I would just take the what part. So that's my way of going forward between the person who is giving a feedback, who is not following, and giving a feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sudeep. I think, I always think of this saying that, the best coaches are not necessarily the best players. So sometimes actually when a coach actually says, you need to play like this, it's kind of wrong to ask the coach, hey, how come you never did this, right? Again, I'm giving a much more simple example to deal with, but even if this person is actually, in your mind, not a great person in how are you banned, but whether the feedback kind of helps you to realize your potential, I think is the key question.
Correct. True. Thank you. Yeah.
Look, should we just move on to the next portion? Anyone else would like to share?
I could, if your time, if you're not running late. I think the greatest role model for me in receiving feedback is children, because you constantly tell them how to do, but they don't resist. I mean, they might a little bit, but they don't take it personally. Whereas if an adult come and told us, you should be doing this, we would get pinched all the time, right? Children are not like that.
Correct.
So maybe we can be a child when receiving feedback sometimes.
Yeah, children learn from observation. Pavitra, do you want to? Thank you, Lakshmi, for sharing. Pavitra?
Yes. Did you have time, Arun? If not, that's fine.
So long as you guys can go a few minutes beyond 7, I'm fine.
No, I was just telling Brother Vishwanath, because he was my partner, that
Okay.
everything that I learned was from the organization when I was a rep. You know, everything like feedback and all. It used to before I used to take it as a, I used to retaliate to that. But I felt that Swami has given me the option, like the training to actually take it out, where that, you know, right now I don't let it react, but I respond, because that's something which is very hard, because I used to respond quickly if someone was to say something, but now I just react, but now I just respond. Yes. So
I think that's a very good point. That's the reason I was telling very early on that actually, yes, if you feel that you're working for Swami, if you feel that Swami is with you, if it's not about actually what others, applaud you for your work, if you move away from that and you're doing it for Swami, I think success, you need not to follow success, it may follow you, right? So I think it's very, very important actually, because many a time our emotions actually really take the productivity out of us. So thanks, Pavitra, for sharing. In interest of time, I will go to the I'll go to the next one, and if we do have time, we can cover some more. Let me go back to my. Are you able to see my slides? Okay. So I also would like you to introspect from the giving standpoint. How comfortable do you feel giving feedback? It's kind of interesting, right? Sometimes you feel like it's very, hey, feedback's so easy to throw around, right? But at the same time, actually, sometimes you also feel difficult to also give feedback, right? That's both sides. And also sometimes even the feedback giver may not do a good job in giving feedback, although you may say I'm good in giving feedback, but it may not really be connecting with the person who's the receiving party too. So give an example of a situation, write down for yourself where you had a difficult time giving feedback and list the reasons. This is for yourself. And then when do you feel comfortable giving feedback? And similarly, like what you did for receiving, what are the reasons? If you can note it for yourself, just contemplate it so that after this portion about giving feedback, then you can see if there is anything that you learned that you would like to apply. A good feedback from a giving standpoint, it's some principles to keep in mind. It's got to be very timely, which means that actually, so not all feedback are like this, like performance feedback that happens like once in 6 months, once in a quarter. That is too late in the game, because situations are moved on, and as you're kind of you're compiling stuff and then telling, it doesn't even resonate with the person. So it's got to be timely at the point in time where it matters. It's got to be very specific, as we already talked about the receiving part, trying to actually, as a giver, it also has to be very specific. So for example, instead of just kind of saying, your email was great, I think instead of that, it would be very important to be very specific, saying that this aspect of what you covered in the email, this example was awesome, because when it did that, the other person was able to get the full picture. So that way it kind of reinforces what is exactly that you are trying to appreciate on and for them to grow on. It's got to be very actionable. The feedback has got to be not general. It's got to be something that they can take on and work on. So for example, if they didn't do a good job with presenting, pointing out what that is, and then how they can tweak it so that they can work on it to improve. And it's got to be impactful. It's got to, like, the feedback that you once gives has got to make a difference to the person, even if it's incremental. And it's very, very important to make it from a position of caring for the person to improve. And so when you're receiving, you need to filter out what the other person could be wrong, but you're the giver, you need to really keep this in mind, right? And spirituality, Swami always says, right? You always forget about the others, you are self-improving yourself. On the other hand, when you're doing it, care about the others and make sure you care about them and do it in that context. So it's the same spiritual thing works here, right? Because everything is spiritual at the end of the day. So, and also be very open-minded, because as a giver, it's possible that we may not have the right information, right perspective, and you may not know exactly, we only know a sliver of it. Actually, the other person may actually, the receiver may have the broader perspective to be able to understand, talk to them, and then hear from them if that made a difference, and hear their perspective. So that's very important. It's not a one-way street. It's actually a conversation. Informal real-time feedback, it really is critical. It enables continuous development, right? Because as I told you, it's not a one-time thing that happens, you know, X months or X weeks or whatever, or during even sometimes during your weekly one-on-ones or whatever. It happens informally, right? The informally is where actually the real magic sort of happens, right? It's part of everyday conversations. It's actually happening in situation. You know, a person is dealing with a situation. How do you give feedback so that they can handle it better? Or they had a difficulty in, you know, in actually working with an individual, but telling them, hey, we want to use this technique. Because what happens in those cases is it's very much in context. It can be immediately applied. And it's a coaching situation. It's not an evaluation situation. The person actually takes it and improves because they can be more productive. So, so it's actually also very important to recognize and appreciate the good work similarly in that same context. If there is something great, immediately point out. Be factual is very important. Be very honest and don't try to sugarcoat things if they have to improve on something, but be very constructive, right? The worst thing is actually sugarcoat is so much that the person didn't really get anything of what you said. Sometimes we very, very want to be nice, but really don't give anything meaningful to help the person. So this actually builds a very continuous development culture and mindset, both for the person as well as for the organization. And it really provides more insights actually that happens continuously. It's happening. And it also builds very collaborative relationship between the person, right? And so which means that actually the person is now more willing to open up and ask for feedback, also the receiver in this product, because they're improving. They know that you're coming from a good place. Giving difficult feedback is actually part of the dharma. It's so shying away from it is not a good leader, right? So it's very important to actually, because that doesn't achieve the goals. It doesn't help the person if you don't give the difficult feedback that they need to sort of work on. So it's very important, even when don't shy away, but balance positive and negative feedback. It's very, you know, if you go to a person and just pound them only with negative feedback, difficult feedback, they're not going to listen, right? As I told you, it's natural human emotion. Now you need to understand when you are a receiver, how difficult you felt. You have to understand the same thing when you are giving the feedback to the other person, right? Appreciate what they do well and then point out what they need to improve on, right? It's very important to mix the two together because then it opens up the heart, right? Otherwise, they're not going to open up the heart. Have an open conversation on what went well and what did not. I mentioned, don't dress the feedback up, right? As I told you, don't sweeten it up to such an extent the person doesn't get the message, right? That doesn't serve any purpose. But be very clear, be empathetic, be helpful, right? If you come from a good place, I think any difficult feedback will be received well. And also phrase the feedback not as criticism, as an opportunity to improve. And also they call it, avoid the negative sandwich, right? What they mean by that is you say something awesome, and then you throw in one negative thing, and then you throw something awesome. What happens is actually the person at the end of it may only take the positive stuff and they're totally confused about, oh, maybe I didn't do anything wrong because the person actually summarized that with a positive stuff. So which means the same thing as sugarcoating it, right? So just make sure that don't try to avoid and don't assume that you have the answers to all the problems that they have, but really have it as a conversation. So it's very important of this one. Now, when providing feedback, it's really important to do the prep work, right? Like similar to any side work we do so much of care, right? Before we do things. I know, like, for example, before this presentation, Ritesh spent a lot of time with me to make sure this kind of flows very well, right? So he actually put so much of time into it. Same thing we have to do to everyone that we work with, because everyone is Swami, right? Everyone is actually wanting to go. So you need to put in the amount of time. One big thing that we do is we take on so many different things, but we don't do good job in everything that we take on. So time management is important. We're going to talk about in one of the sessions later. Also, like, taking emotions away helps you to do more things and be in the present moment. So really take all of those things so that you can actually be in the present moment and do a preparation for the feedback really well. Gather your thoughts, identify the key pieces of information you want to share, decide how you're going to deliver it. Is it going to be in person, by email, all of those things. Be very, very deliberate about how you do it. Focus on the tone. For constructive feedback, be approachable, be informal. Because if you're too formal, sometimes the constructive feedback is not taken. I think you have to be empathetic. Help the receiver to find the solution. The worst thing is you tell everything they want to do, but you don't allow them to sort of introspect. Like, for example, today's session is not about telling you what to do. You need to introspect your situation so that you can figure out what your right answer is. Explore the facts and provide concrete examples. Distinguish the opinion from the facts. so that when you give it, don't give opinion, give facts. And listen actually when you give the feedback. Is the person actually, don't just kind of blast away and without realizing whether the person is actually receiving it. Hear their perspective, be collaborative, give time for them to process it. Make sure that they've understood and ask them questions. If they want more time, give them more time. If you need to do a follow-up, schedule a follow-up. The other one is creating a very forward focus. The feedback should not be about penalizing what they did. It should always be about, again, how to create a plan to improve themselves. So having this gives a very positive spiritual way of looking at things. Here is some example of a feedback that I just cut and pasted from the internet. So always make a feedback very effective using a framework of situation, behavior, impact, right? An example is, if someone did something not great in a meeting, say that the situation, yesterday's team meeting, when you're presenting XYZ, the behavior that I saw was you interrupted constantly. And why that mattered? Because that forced the other colleagues to shut down, because you spoke so much, they stopped actually sharing their ideas. Consequently, they're not able to discuss their ideas and arrive at a team-based solution. So basically here it was a situation, something they did, and what they did, how that kind of came in the way of the larger goal. So this actually makes it more something that's actually the person to follow and be able to correct themselves. Same thing actually when you're giving positive feedback, instead of just saying you're working well on these reports, well done, it's great that you gave the feedback, they may feel good, but it doesn't sort of reinforce what good work they're doing. So I've seen that you put in a process to reduce the time it takes to process these reports. That's great work and something we could use across the whole company. It pointed out the specific thing that they did, but by doing it again and again, how it has actually added value to the company or to others. So that kind of reinforces the positive side. So it's very important to actually be very, very specific in what we do. So going back just to the giving feedback checklist, intention is very important. Think of why you want to give feedback. The setting, are you having a feedback in a safe environment, right? Make the person actually feel very safe about it, right? And not feel threatened. So it's very important to make sure you got in the right place, and the right frame of mind, all of those things. Focus, are you conveying the key points and the main concerns? Be very, very honest. Don't try to just make up stories just to kind of like, make them feel good. All that. Be very, very honest. Honesty is very important in this thing. It's all about your intent. How you communicate is more important, not about actually diluting it away. Are you specific enough? Have a conversation. Are you allowing the receiver to add comments and ask clarification? And focus on growth rather than penalizing for what they did in the past. So make sure that you think of these in mind as you go into giving a feedback. I'm not sure whether we have the time, but if we had the time, we would have done a breakout session to go into say how you would have applied this in any of the situations that you've had difficulties in giving feedback. And then how would you generally approach giving feedback? So maybe we can do something. I don't know, Ritesh, do we have time or should we just move on?
We should just debrief now.
We can't
do the breakout.
Yeah, we'll do the debrief. So maybe on chat, if you don't mind, you want to just write down the challenges that you face when you give feedback to others. Cultural. For Santosh, there's a cultural angle to it. Sentiments. I guess the sentiment of the other person that you're concerned about. Knowing if it's appropriate to provide, correct? Sometimes you don't know whether by saying that is actually correct or not, either professionally or legally. Keep your emotions out of it. Yeah, it's kind of tough to do that. Yeah, on not knowing how to put it in a way that's most effective. Yeah, how do you take the time to process this so that means you really need to understand the other person before you can give it to the other person, which means you need to invest the time. Emotional, clearly, because you're working together, not sure where my boundaries are. I have difficulty giving feedback about younger or senior employees. I worry about the consequences of giving feedback. It's a good point. Instead of blaming, suggesting how a certain task could have been done. the other person must be overall more qualified, maybe overall qualified. And person receiving feedback is very defensive. These are great ones, actually. I know that we, in the formal part of the session, we don't have time to address it, but maybe in the Q&A session after this, we could probably talk more. And Jagu uncle says that delicate situations like that be going on in the other person's life. There's so much of context to the other person that also you have to keep in mind when giving feedback. Okay, and Sriti says, believing in there being multiple right paths and hard to distinguish what feedback is worth giving. So, and sometimes actually it's not about giving a solution, it's actually about pointing out actually where you see is an issue. Sometimes you may be wrong, but having the conversation can help collectively also get to the right thing. So that's why I think it's not about thinking that you know all the answers, or your suggestion may not be correct, but being very open as a giver, that way the receiver also feels that you're also not a boss trying to say everything, right? I think it kind of allows and invite emotional swings. Okay, so let's go to the next one. What is the one thing that you will improve to be more effective in giving feedback? And if maybe we could do a similar thing, if you raise your hand, and maybe along the lines that you typed in, if anyone would like to put up their hands, and maybe we can do for a couple of them, if you feel comfortable. What would you improve on coming out of this session in terms of giving feedback? Some takeaway that you have. Santosh, please go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I would do is not sandwiching, the negative sandwich. I did that in the past and it did not work. You only pick up the positives and totally lost my point. So that I would definitely apply. And I think that's the best takeaway from this session for me.
Thanks for pointing out. I think all of us run into the same thing. We don't want to make someone feel bad, and we end up losing.
Exactly. You start with appraisal, and then you will lose the focus point.
Thanks for sharing, Santosh. Anyone else would like to share? I think Ganapati typed in something, going with an open mind and hear the other person too at the same time. So that's a good one, Ganapati. So that way you're not just pounding away, but you not having preconceived notions about the feedback provider. Yeah, that. So maybe we can actually move on. I think we're running probably out of time, and then we can have the optional Q&A. We'll talk through this. So here are some of the key takeaways I just wanted you to kind of remember. This is not necessarily very comprehensive. I think key thing is just be aware of our roles and responsibilities. And also there's a context of those, right? At work, there is a certain way you need to do things. All of that stuff, right? You can't randomly give feedback. One thing which I've realized always is, whether you're in a work situation, or whether in a personal family situation or a size, and treat everyone equally with the same amount of respect. Don't, we sometimes actually tend to think someone whom we know, and somehow we actually don't give them the same respect that we need to do. Think of everyone as Swami. If you treat carefully someone at work, we should do the same thing in any other situation. Because then when you do that, you'll be very much sort of like treating everyone equally in terms of giving and receiving feedback. That's something which along this journey, I also picked up because it's so easy. Like the same thing happens to when our parents say something to us. We have the running to say, oh, we know them. Oh, my mom says this all the time, kind of thing. Get your fundamentals right. Self-confidence is super, super important, as I tell you, because you could just, it's like a whack-a-mole. You can just keep dealing with all of these things. But if you go back to your roots, Swami is with you. You're there for a purpose. You follow those. Swami is the one that you really think and you know really matters. He's inside you. He's giving you the confidence. What everything says doesn't matter, but you're doing it with the right attitude, learning, all of that stuff. Like, just keep reinforcing that time. I think have a growth mindset. I can't emphasize enough on this one. Understand that the feedback is a critical part of doing our roles. There's no way around it. It is, as a human, we are a social being. Everything that we do is interacting with people. That's the only way things get done. Receiver of feedback is in control. That's super important to know, because a giver can give whatever they want. It's a receiver who lets it in. So it's better to be proactive and actually make it one's strength. And the giver has a critical role to play in the growth of the other person. And also in the same process, the giver also grows in this person. So I just would like you to keep this in mind and keep and always keep thinking of what Swami has said and how Swami is emphasized in all of his talks. There'll always kind of, because I feel whenever you have an identity, truth, any of these triggers, think of it as saying as a Swami in the other person, that when it comes to relationship trigger. When you're having difficulty to take in feedback, feel that you are full, you're like Swami, you have the potential to be like Swami, right? Have those things in mind to just keep reinforcing. Brother Ritesh shared this with me as we were talking through this, and thanks Lakshman for sharing the slide. In a way, it's actually sort of, it's Advaita in practice. Treat all as Swamis and yourself too as Swami. The difficulty is when the other Swami is behaving badly. At the time, you remain the good Swami. So it's very nicely put, actually. If you think of everyone in that context, it gives you a good perspective. Frankly, at work, think of Swami all the time. Like for example, I get into difficult situations at work, and I always keep a Swami's picture in my pocket. And actually, I touch it. Actually, is one way to remind me that to bring me back to that awareness. Do have something like that. I know that Sundar has used to have this practice in tennis. When you play a point and then you did it was not a good point. The athletes do something in terms of actually how they, I guess he can tell you, I think either they touch their heart or something with their hand they do that kind of brings them back into the present moment, right? Have some tips and techniques so that actually it reminds you to come back and be in touch with Swami. I remember what Sundar said actually a long time back in Satsang. I just keep it in mind actually. Thanks, Sundar. So, so that is what I have, and I'll leave it to Ritesh.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you so much. Just before we go into Q&A, since we're at the official end of the session, I would like to just take you guys through a few slides, and we'll then have an optional Q&A session that you can hang out for. Arun has very graciously offered to stay back and help us with any questions you have. Just a moment. So I'd like to start out by actually thanking you, Arun, Mr. Arun Uncle, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think you've given us a lot of color from experiences that we would have from reading the black and white of a text, right? The pre-reading material was very good, but like having you explain the various triggers and how to overcome the triggers and really putting it into perspective from Swami and Swami's values was very insightful, actually. Thank you so much for doing that. And I think, as you said, we will definitely give you feedback, and we're also going to be more open to receiving feedback and, trying to constantly improve and to realize the full potential of Swami. And Swami has told all of us, you are God. And right, so to get to that level of we are also gods, we have to take the feedback and process it and improve ourselves. So thank you so much for this session. And with that, I would ask everyone, this might be a little bit funny, but we do want feedback from you for this session. So, and we also want you to be mindful about how you give this feedback. So we don't want you to get across any triggers, any of the techniques you've used, and please do use them to give us feedback. So it's at tinyurl.com/ELWS-feedback. And the upcoming sessions, so we've now, with this today, we've finished about 6 sessions. We have 4 more sessions left. So if you have not registered for it yet, please do register. The next session is on conflict resolution, still in the communication realm, by Dr. Ranga Jayaraman. It's promising to be a very exciting session. And the difference is that session starts at 4 p.m. instead of 5:30. So I would like to point out the change in times. And this session has a number of learning material as well. So we have a number of pre-reading material and pre-watching material. It's on the website, and I've also listed it here. Please do check out the website for more of the LMS on the conflict resolution session.
Ranga is awesome. Don't miss it.
Yeah. There you go. Our faculty member has said it. And so please do register for that session if you have not already registered. And with that, I would like to say, if you have any more questions, please do contact us. And now I would like to hand it back to Mr. Arun. And I request all of you, if you have any questions to ask and learn from others' questions, please do stay back if you can spare a few minutes. Thank you.
And I wanted to, before we go into it, I just wanted to thank everyone and for giving this opportunity. And it really, I learned a lot in this process. It's really so wonderful to be among young adults after a long time. And I want to personally thank Ritesh, actually, because Ritesh actually was a big part of the journey for me. And so many satsangs as we came up with this together, and he kept me in check and also helped me to think through many of these things. So I really want to thank Ritesh for the time that you put in with me.
Actually, I would like to say that I did nothing, and just always saying, please, can we have this? Can we have this? I was just pushing him. That was the main thing that I was doing. And I really appreciated the opportunity to see how he would think about these things and his wisdom. He was really glad. Thank you, Mr. Arun. Thank you, Arun, Uncle, for the opportunity. And now we can open up the floor. Sorry, go ahead. Manisha has a question. Yes. Go ahead, Manisha.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Manisha, Sairam.
That's my eternal question on Zoom meetings these days. So I had a question about what role does your personal bias or your own prejudice play when you are the receiver of a feedback? So sometimes we are, I mean, as is human nature, I guess, sometimes we are inclined to hear from certain people and not really take the feedback of others into consideration. Depending on, yeah, I don't know, there might be multiple reasons, but what role do these two factors or any other factors play into this?
I think it plays a big role, I think, because if I'm not mistaken, what you said is one part is actually is sort of like the, when you say personal prejudice, I'm assuming it's in the context of the people who are giving, or is it in the context of actually, is it from the context of the people who are providing?
People, yeah.
Yeah, it plays a huge role actually, and I personally, it's very naturally very emotional when someone whom you may have a certain opinion of, if you will, for whatever that opinion may be, you may not have. They may think like someone, I think Sandeep, someone mentioned that, hey, this person is not very good at it. Why should I take the feedback from the rest? Or this person is actually is the person who behaved the way I didn't like it. Whatever, all of those come in mind. And as a result of which, actually, when they give a feedback, you tend to question, is it coming from because they are from something that matters to them, and all of those things come into play a lot, actually. And what I found a lot, me personally, is actually sometimes the best feedback comes from actually people whom you think actually are the person whom you have a prejudice against, because they actually end up shining a much better job in terms of a light on actually where we need to improve on. So that's what I found actually some of the best feedbacks that I've gotten, because they was sometimes actually when people that I thought were difficult people to actually work with or get feedback from. So it does play a big role, but to really sort of like parse it away and look at it is very difficult actually, because of what you exactly said. The prejudice comes in the way. I don't know if I answered your question, Manisha, but I personally, I think it plays a big role. Definitely the ego part is a big role, because it doesn't matter who tells it, that plays a big role, but definitely who tells also plays a big role.
Your audio kept breaking for me, so I didn't hear the full answer, but I'll talk to you afterwards. Thank you. Saira.
Sundar's next. Yeah, sorry.
Sanjana, you had something. Sairam.
Sairam, I let Sundar go first.
Okay, Sairam, Sundar.
Okay, Sairam. So I just wanted to talk quickly about the growth mindset. That's how I have a question on that. How do you know? I think maybe all of us have gone through it. How do you know when the growth mindset, may not be working anymore, or like, hey, maybe it's time to leave this, this way of approach, and I've tried it enough. It's not working for me, right? Maybe sometimes I feel that I have to tell myself, listen, you know what? My skills are not ready for it yet. I'm trying to push. So I guess it's a balance of how do you know when to keep pushing, and how to know when, hey, I got to change my approach. Right.
Correct. In a way, it's a slightly meta point on that one. Is part of the learning is also to realize that, right? Part of the learning mindset is also to sort of figure out whether what you are trying to work on and improve on, is it actually working for you, or is it actually the technique or the approach that needs to change, or is it the runway time that you have is too long that that it may not be worth it because you're also factoring in other things also in your context, right? So in some sense, actually keeping that that thing in mind with respect to because these things are not in isolation. They're all in the context of something that we are doing to grow, achieve, whatever that be, right? So the way I think of it is saying that you also need to kind of be mindful of, if it's not working, what should I do to actually do something different? That's part of the learning. And talk to others to also get input so they can shine light on it. That's why I think about it actually, because like, for example, I was just watching this Shakuntala Devi's math thing, right? I can't imagine myself to be a human computer, for example, right? I can have aspirations to be a human computer, but frankly, not at the rate at which that person does it. So there's some reality also to actually that. So in some sense, it's a little bit of a balance of actually, is it an achievable reality versus completely out of it, and the runway that you need.
Thanks.
Sanjana?
Hi, Ram. The session has been really helpful and eye-opening. So thank you so much for doing this for us. My question is slightly in a different, it's not really in a work setup, but more in a personal setup. I think everyone in this meeting is either Indian or American Indian. So maybe this question will resonate with everyone. In the Indian society, especially when we're dealing with older people, I feel like the feedback, all the rules you've said work so beautifully in a office setup or when you're just talking to the outside world. But when you're interacting with older people from the Indian society, especially if they're from the Sai family or from a family perspective, especially if you're a woman, how do you feel these rules play into that? I was just talking to Lakshmi. We were in a breakout room, and she gave such a beautiful example where you may have just finished cooking, and there will be at least 10 people talking differently about everything after you've spent like 3-4 hours cooking something. So all feedback coming from older Indian people may not be the best in the most in all scenarios, but it is for the most part pretty relentless. How do we fit everything that you have given in a Indian society and being a female in a female role?
Thanks, Sanjana, for asking that. And I may not necessarily be the best person to answer that, but I think I'll think about sort of a framework to think about. Sometimes when you're away from that situation, it's a little bit easy to look at it with the right perspective. But when you're in the middle of it, it's always difficult. But one way to think about it is to say that, the way I think about it, saying that you cannot, our culture is a big part of it, right? As I mentioned to you, every part of the role that you play, you're part of some setup or organization that has a certain culture, norms to it. So, which means that actually that being aware of that is quite important. The second one is actually, which is independent of that, for example, trying to understand instead of immediately sort of like resisting. What I'm saying, resisting, I'm not saying you need to accept it, but instead of just sort of like resisting it, trying to understand what they're saying. Another one is to, if you have the time to actually have a rapport with that person, to then have that person understand your situation. And if you have one person you can make an ally with respect to how you're thinking through it. And then in that process, you give in a little bit and that person completely understands. As you'll probably understand, sometimes a grandma and a granddaughter relationship is an amazing relationship. The grandma tries to really throw away all the rules when it comes to a grandchild, right? While still insisting to follow the rules for our own children, right? This is like a beautiful relationship. So in some sense, actually, when you can, if you have the time and the ability to build such a relationship, then you can make an ally of that person. And that ally can then actually help to work with the other people, actually, right? So long as what you're saying is got a valid point associated with it. So I'm not, instead of going to the very specifics of it, I'm just thinking about techniques. And sometimes the feedback they're giving may not totally be applicable the way you do it, right? They may, let's say they say at work you have to do X, Y, Z. They may not know the work context, right? Maybe the gist of it you can capture from it is to say is, be nice to people, be respectful people, all of that stuff. Just see if there is some things you can distill from it that you can still apply, but not maybe literally what they said. So that's the best I can do in terms of like abstracting out the situation and giving input on.
And if there's just one other follow-up question, if when you feel like feedback is relentless and you address that point, when you feel like feedback is relentless, sometimes you just have to say it in your mind that, okay, this is not something I'm going to accept, versus tell the giver. In this situation, how do you feel we can handle this feedback without being disrespectful to someone who's older?
I think that's what I said, actually, to really have the conversation with the person. Because many time I feel what I've noticed is there is a wall that everyone draws because of what I would call is you put them in a bucket of they are like that. They are like old people. They are actually have a certain culture they come from. And because we don't communicate with them, because we are younger or we are of a different generation, a different context, this thing bridge gets even wider, longer and longer, if you will. So as a result of which, actually, we are not ultimately communicating with them. And as a result of which, everything now becomes more of like a ping pong. They say something, how do you, it's almost like that. So the question is actually, how can we actually build that rapport? Just like what you can do with your grandma, right? I'm not saying that you'll be able to do with everyone, but it's almost like kind of like understanding the person. And that's one of the reasons, actually, if you really realize about it, actually, younger people and an older person, because an older person is just like any of us. They are actually inside us. They have the same ability to think and all that, but people don't interact with them, right? And so this is more and more they're going to be. So that's the way I think about it, is to say, how do you kind of treat them just like anyone else, but build a bridge with them.
Thank you so much.
Arun, I want to ask you a slightly contradictory question. So do you see silence as a mechanism of giving feedback sometimes as well? Because you could be in situations where you're giving feedback. If you're giving feedback to somebody who's at your level, they're usually in a corporate environment, they're usually willing to listen. If you're giving feedback to somebody who reports to you, they're usually willing to listen. If you're giving feedback to a direct supervisor who's not looking for that feedback, but basically still needs to hear that feedback, how do you make that difficult decision of if you just be silent, and do you actually try to sneak in feedback somehow? Because that's a really tricky situation, right?
Yeah, so I think it depends. I'm just thinking out loudly here that it depends on the company. Everything has got a context to it, right? So for example, in my company, I think the managers have a tougher time than actually the individual contributors, because the culture is such that I think it's anyone can give feedback to the person above, and that's sort of the culture of the company.
Exactly.
Right?
So
right?
In a cultural environment where 360-degree feedback is not appreciated, right? Where it's more hierarchical, and if you give feedback to your boss, that's culturally, from an organizational perspective, viewed as direct. You're directly going against the wishes of your boss, or you're disrespecting him almost, right? So it becomes very tricky in that situation, right?
Right. So the question is actually whether the feedback is very critical for your job satisfaction and your your happiness and everything in your job. And if the feedback is very critical to the larger goals of the project, which if it's not given, this thing is just going to go south, right? So those are very, very critical situations, whereas either your personal thing is actually being threatened, if you will, or it's the larger thing. So you need to kind of understand how critical are those things that this is impacting. Then the next question comes is how do you find the right path to it? I think similar to what I was telling Sanjana, the question is either you build a rapport with that person so that actually you give good stuff to that person that makes him feel happy at that point, inject in this thing. So this is okay to do this sandwich approach here, if you will, and mix in positive with negative in this particular case. Or actually you find allies, right, who can also do the same. And so, which means that actually find the allies who can do that to the person, or as a group you can do it. So you let us sort of, it all depends on how important it is. And if it is less important, the person is not willing to listen, maybe it's not worth your time. On the other hand, I think if it is super critical and the person will listen, figure out other allies with, or is this coming to really affect you, just find another role or move to some other part. Because sometimes you are constrained by where you are, and if it impacts you, then it's a free society.
Thanks.
Thanks, Arun. I think the next in line is actually Rishma.
Sairam.
Wait, sorry, Vishwa. I said Rishma. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
It's okay. You can go ahead first.
Okay. So, one question here which I had here was, without hurting one's self-esteem, so how does one take feedback? So that's one question. And the other question is, what's the frequency with which one needs to solicit feedback, either be it with family members or be it at, be it with your manager? With manager, it definitely happens, whether you like it or not, they give you reviews, but you need to keep asking them for regular feedback. What's the frequency with which you ask them? And also, sometimes when they give you negative feedback, how do you politely tell them that, and if it's not the truth, how do you politely point it out to them, or do you just ignore it? So,
okay. So in case I forget, I'll go with the first one and then you remind me about the other two. The first one you said is actually, how do you get feedback that doesn't affect your self-worth, right? In some sense, self-esteem. Right. One thing actually, when it comes to proactively asking feedback, I think was it in the context of proactive feedback asking or the other way around?
Yes, this is the context of proactive feedback.
Proactively asking, right? So I think one thing it's very important about the proactive part also how you ask, right? So if you go in with the tendency of being weak, right? If you go into the tendency of being weak, and what I mean by that is actually is if you kind of say, I just don't know how to do this. I see a feedback actually giver, you're in a good position where if you are actually naturally kind of showing stuff that you are a person who is trying to grow, and the work that you're doing is actually helping, is proving that you're a person who's in the growth path. And in that process, actually, when such a feedback is asked, the person giving would actually not use, because sometimes if you don't do it the right way, you actually may invite trouble on yourself, right? So an example is, could be, you can say, you know, I really worry whether I can really present to the senior people, right? If you say that, in a way, actually, you're also taking away the confidence from your manager, right? The manager is going to say, this guy is not confident. I'm not going to give him a chance to present to the senior people, right? So in some sense, it's a little bit of a confidence game too, right? So the confidence actually, so in some sense, you also have to believe that you'll be able to do it. Second thing is actually, you kind of show to the person that you are a growth person by some of the things you've done. In that context, actually, when you're asking for this feedback, I'm presenting to this person, I've done this, but here's something I would like to improve on. Then what you're doing is you're being more precise about a change that you want to make to do it. Now, then as you build a rapport with this person, then you can ask for more larger constructive feedback. So you also have to figure out how to use that seeking thing also. To your parents, you can ask, because they have, you know, it's a very different thing, right? Because they want you, they love you, all this, that stuff, they know you. But when a person whom you're, you know, interacting in a very official capacity, you need to be a little bit more careful about how you do it. Because you may not get what you want, actually, when you say, tell me feedback on this thing, I'm not sure if I'm ready for it. You pretty much are saying you're not ready for it. You're giving them the answer.
Thank you.
So you need to be careful. What is the other one you mentioned? Sorry.
What is the frequency with which you solicit feedback? You know, do you ask feedback on a monthly basis, or, you know, is there like a granularity with which you actually solicit feedback?
Yeah. It's a good, see, the way I think of it is saying that is a good working relationship is actually where the person knows that you're growing and improving and you're doing things. And then you have such a rapport with that person that that person actually feels very comfortable giving feedback at different points in time. That's your ideal one because you're constantly growing. Now, if that is not necessarily presenting to yourself as the case, instead of asking it again and again, do it more in regular intervals. But going into that feedback process, you also want to go into the meeting with respect to what are the things you have done. Go in always kind of saying that, hey, we've done this thing, here's the next thing I'm going to do. And then when you ask the feedback in the context, it puts them in the right mindset to give you a positive feedback on how you can improve. But if you start off just purely asking the feedback, then I think you are immediately putting yourself in a situation because the person now needs to sort of, cook up something and it may not do it. So just do it not on a, if you don't have an informal relationship, do it on a formal basis, but do it actually presenting other things you've done and then ask for it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arun. Next in line is Namita.
Saira, Namita.
Yeah, Sairam. So I have a question related to feedback, like my manager or colleague, they are just, or my manager indirectly they give my feedback to my colleague and not directly communicating with me. So like whether it's a positive or negative. So is there anything I can do there, or like what I should do in that situation?
Well, this is actually a manager is not giving the feedback for you directly to you, but is giving
Yeah.
to, and it's kind of indirectly coming to you.
Yeah, it could be positive or negative, but I want to know like where I improved, or where I should improve or something.
I'm sorry, I may not know the content, but I'll just give you some general answers, so because they may not require more specifics to talk to. But the point being that I think I would suggest actually, if you have a relationship with your manager where you can directly ask for this feedback, similar to what Vishwanath was asking. So at somewhat regular intervals, and make it a habit for your manager to tell you. Maybe initially they may not be able to, but if you, sometimes, as a receiver, you may have to train the giver, right? So you may have to train the giver actually. And so, which means having these sessions, because I know in the past, sometimes I've been reluctant to give feedback, but the receiver actually made sure that I gave the feedback to them, and that trained me to give feedback to that person. All right. So I want to schedule that and see if that actually works. Right. Second one is actually if you find out the reason why this person is uncomfortable giving it to you, because some people have a difficulty in giving negative feedback. They don't want to give because either they want to feel nice, or they don't know how to handle the emotion of the other situation. So which means that actually partly it also comes down to how you come across to the other person in terms of how you handle feedback, how you're able to calmly handle it, how you're able to, that kind of will also give them the comfort to give you feedback. So that's why I think if you sort of like take the mindset of the giver, then you can change as a receiver, so that you make the giver feel comfortable.
Yeah, those are good points. And thanks for the wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last, yes, go ahead.
Sarah, Arun, and Cole, thank you so much for such a wonderful and informative session, and for your time, as well. Also the extended office hours. One of the participants had a question regarding one of the bullet points you made, was when you talked about if one person was to change in response to some feedback, is there more demand coming from the person who gave the feedback? And they just wanted you to elaborate on that.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Well, I think one thing, it depends on the giver, right? If the giver is actually a person who wants you to improve, right? So like, for example, if you follow cricket, right? I think Sachin Tendulkar had this amazing coach who probably was relentless to actually, he saw the potential in Sachin, and he pushed him, and his brother pushed him to achieve his heights, right? And then when he looks back, Sachin said, these guys really made me who I am. So in that particular case, that coach had nothing bad. He really wanted to make Sachin a better person. Of course, Sachin is an easy example to point out because he's, because everyone knows him. I'm just pulling his name as an example. So it kind of comes down to who the giver is. There's a giver genuinely caring to make you a better person. So which means sometimes the good coaches, they help you to kind of like, after you feel you hit something, then you want to hit the next one. So Swami does that, right? I think if you really see Swami, he'll never keep, I was talking to Ritesh actually, Swami never keeps us, he never allows us to bask in our glory of our successes. Like as soon as this presentation is over, I need to go 5 other things. Swami just keeps sending stuff over, right? So, because he's just constantly making us do more things. So in that case, it's because Swami, wants us to make us better, we do it. So it all comes from the giver is. Now, if the giver is coming in a much more of a mindset, if you will, which is more to actually pull you down, to actually give you low performance ratings, is looking to sort of like push you out, or is looking to actually make you look bad in front of others, right? That is something you should be able to understand is in that context, this negative feedback is repeatedly coming, pounding, then you know that actually this is not coming from a good place. But still, even in the situation, you may want to see whether the feedback is still relevant, because you never want to lose the feedback if it is something useful for you. But at the same time, actually, you also need to keep this in mind, because that means if you're in a work situation that is going on, that's not very healthy for you, right? Yeah, just like similarly, I was telling Kapil, that means either you need to have figure out a way to give feedback back to the person, or you find another manager or another person to go work at, because it's very unhealthy, right? So that's the way I would look at it. Actually, look at the intent. Look at actually when you give feedback, and when they said when you make this improvement, are they recognizing the improvement that you made? If they're not recognizing the improvement that you made, because good coaches will recognize improvement. Good coaches are not bad people. They really recognize the improvement you made, and then they help you to sort of move on to the next thing. I don't know if I was helpful, Rishma. It depends on the situation that you're talking about, but I'm giving you some very generalities, if you will, on how to look at it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Arun, can I go?
Yeah, please.
Arun, so my question is like, I mean, my situation I'm telling, like, see, I work for one company, and then it's like outsourcing to client side, and neither in the manager will not give any feedback from my employer side. Just like it takes like yearly performance, like based on like client feedback, whatever he has given. And maybe he'll add some more things and just give it, but it's not a concrete thing and all that. But I that thing, and now is it okay to ask, like, as a we'll have like with the client managers, we'll have some sessions on project improvement and all, but once in a while I'll ask him, like, because they give like quarterly feedback directly to the, in a portal they will update and give it to, hand over it to our employer. But like the thing is, like, it will be mostly like a positive and a thing, but like whether it is a growth or learning opportunities or whatever, like if I get to know from other team people like something else coming on, like they are doing, then I'll ask client manager, like if you get an opportunity, or like I was interested, and I'll ask him for providing an opportunity to work on these technologies and all. But like that is okay, work related, but like in personality growth of point of view, and there is no one to give feedback, like whether I'm doing like growth is coming up, how it is going. So in these situations, like whom to ask, like just like how to handle these situations, like in these cases.
Correct. I think this is I think you and I probably briefly chatted a long time back, but I think this one is, if I'm the way I think of it is saying, the person who's responsible for your growth is your manager in your company where you work for, but the place where you're spending most of your time is with the client who's not vested in your growth, because all that they care about is the finishing the project, and in the context of the project to give feedback. Am I correct? That's sort of what.
Correct.
Right. So this is a very difficult scenario. So the question in these particular cases is, you have to sort of figure out whether your manager at your company is capable of giving you personal growth. What I mean by that is actually is, when I say capable, is if they had the information, are they capable of giving you growth feedback? Right? That is something you need to be a good judge of that particular one, which means the next question that comes is, how much can you keep your manager informed of the work you're doing? Which means you have to be very communicative about the kind of work you're doing, how you do it. And let's say your manager is actually a good person who can look at it and tell you how you can grow, given your other ambitions of your goal. Then that again, it could be very rare, that happening. That's one way. The other one is you need to find an ally in the company where you're working at, and that person whom you respect there is able to take that extra effort and time to groom you or help you, right? And that means they're doing it out of their own personal relationship with you, and maybe in some way actually you need to kind of tie it back to saying when they help you to improve, their output of what you're providing will actually become better. Some connection you can make it, there's something in it for them. Otherwise, you have to rely on mentors who are outside, right, to help you with this thing, right? Those are the three options that are there, right? Because your problem here is the person who's supposed to be vested in your growth is not an information flow. The person who's seeing you on a daily basis has got nothing vested in them to actually help you in your growth. So which means you'll have to somehow figure out which side you can actually invest in with your own energy and relationship to actually make it happen. Otherwise, you need to have a constant mentor who's aware of the context of it to help you. Those are very high level points I'm saying. But again, all of these would require a little bit more time to go into very specific details because the specifics may come up with new ideas.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Arun.
And Arun, I think there's a couple more slides on your slides. I'll let you present, talk about them. Here, they're on I'm presenting them for you, so you can go ahead and.
Sure. So here are some additional information for you that will be part of the slide deck, where you already had some reading material that was sent to you. And I just want to remind that saying that, with all of these things, take step back to see the bigger picture always. And I think this document, right, which is you have linked here, Ritesh actually has some more details, correct?
Yes.
So
it was part of the pre-reading material as well.
Yeah, it's very comprehensive, the pre-reading material that kind of goes into this whole receiving feedback part of it. So definitely, I think go through that. And also, just emphasizing some of the points here, whether what the feedback is about is whether I get this job, whether I am productive as I might be on the, sorry, I'm just, maybe it's too late for me. I'm not able to fully read this thing.
On the publications front.
On the publications front. And about the feedback. Yeah, basically going about, there's the whole factor is like, how do you distill, the actual content of the feedback from actually what the feedback that they've given, right? Distill it away is very important. And actually it's, good conditions part. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I read this thing. But maybe the point being that actually just go through this doc, it'll help you to summarize and re-emphasize what we talked about in the presentation today. And also there are some more reading material and exercises that if you're open to it, we can send to you. And maybe in the future, you can probably have any office hours or something like that if people have more questions to talk through this.
ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात् ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात् ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्